Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Yasmin Dagher. I'm an architect at Beirut Heritage Initiative. Today's presentation, Carpentry Works, Doors, Windows, and Triple Arches, will be hosted by Paula Abou Harb, an architect specialized in historic preservation. Paula, the floor is yours.
Hello, Yasmin. Thank you, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to start right away and take you through what we're going to talk about today, from an introduction and a historical overview, a little bit to go through the history of windows, doors, and triple arches, to the pathological problems and the damages after the 4th of August blast, but as well after decades of not taking care of our heritage, and then to end up with the methods of restoration of these elements. So first of all, I'd like to start with a display of pictures, old pictures of Beirut. And I would invite you as well to just pick any picture you like from your archive, or even a recent picture, and put it there. And you will have the same effect when you look at it. And you see that these buildings really talk to you through the openings, through the arches, through the windows, the doors. And this constitutes such an integral part of the building that you cannot dissociate openings from architecture, from the facade. And this is why these elements are so important. This is why they define the architecture. And one of my favorite, or actually one of the most interesting buildings I've taken a picture of, is this building. Probably you've seen it some 50 times if you have a foot between downtown and the area of Bashura or towards Sodeko. It's on the intersection of the road. And if you look at the building, it speaks a lot with all its elements. It really captured my attention because it was such a multilingual message. It gave such a multilingual message. And that was mostly why I took this picture, and I wanted to start with it. Also, maybe partially it captured my attention because of the red traffic light always there, so you had to stop and look at it. And when you look and dissect the elements of the buildings, you see on the first floor you have the triple arches. They are pointed, looking to the north, to the sea. And then you go to the second floor, you see an evolution of these triple arches, which is what we call the segmental or three-pointed arch. And then you have also openings with horseshoe arches, a door with an arch on top, which is a different style. Also windows, arch-shaped. And then you have slits in the middle of the building out of nowhere. When you look at it, even unconsciously, you notice that this is, in fact, a modern addition. And you see as well, also in the second floor, just randomly, some also square openings. And you start to wonder what happened here, so that right there in the middle, somebody decided to just, okay, you know what, let's remove the arches. Maybe a square is better, a rectangle is better. And I'm not saying that this is the story behind it. It could be just one version of it. There could be so many reasons why this happened in this way, but it made you think. So when you look at the facade, it makes you think, and this is because of all the openings that are there. They give a hint of dating. So what happened before what, which is the earlier version of the building? What period was it built in? What is the social connotation that it gives? What are the spaces that it defines behind those openings? Do we have a central hall? Do we have a small room, a staircase? This is all because of the opening. We can know that. It does give also an economical association. So what happened there, so that this style was picked and this not? Maybe also a political reason. Maybe something happened in the country, and maybe Nobu hit the facade, and this is why something changed. And then we have also the architectural and stylistic nuance. What were they influenced by? What were the desires architectural-wise to make such thing? And this is all openings. So this is the reason that lies behind the importance of openings in a building. And I'm going to take this opportunity to take you on a trip with me a little bit to history, so that first of all we can see and we can feel what happened during these thousands of years that brought the openings to the shape that it has today? What is the value of what we have right now, and how we can understand it, how we can cherish it, and how we can understand the evolution of it? So from our earliest times, we have the corbelling technique, which we can see in the doors, even in vaults. We have a small hole that lets in light. This was the best they can do. And then this technique was the first step towards the creation of arches later on, etc. And then afterwards, let's move on with time and see that we also have the first fragments or the first remains of wooden doors dating back even to the 3000 BC, 3063 BC. And these are really, you can see wooden planes there. We have also evidence of stone doors that were used as far back, even in Egypt. It was very popular, very employed, a routine to have doors, even false doors, as we see in the middle, which was an imaginary passage between the world of the living and the worlds of the dead. And even we stay in that period, which is the Egyptian period. And if we take a close look at the openings during that period, it used to be an unglazed roof opening or a high opening without any elements to close it. We have some examples that are very interesting, which is the clerestory lighting. And this is also an Egyptian period when they raise the central hall space that it is higher from the adjoining spaces, and then light can come in to the middle room and lighten it from the dark that invades it. And so we can also note that these lighting windows were made of perforated stone. So this is the material that it was made from. Up until that time, and I think until very recently, a lot of windows were covered with, for example, animal hides, flattened horns, as we see in the middle picture, as well as paper covers in Japan, Korea, and China. And so these are just ways so that they can let in light while at the same time preventing, robbery or exterior, factors damaging the houses. Also, to many cultures, especially, for example, here, the ancient Greeks, the doors were considered a very sacred element, and each door had their own deities. They were made of materials of the highest quality. So we can find really materials like wood and marble, and also sometimes they add, gold, ivory to those doors. And they were a really special passage. You even can have an own ritual upon entering a door, and that is not just doors on temples, it's even doors on houses. So the doors were really an important element in the architecture. It signified a lot and had so many connotations. And this evolved during the Roman period as well. The same importance of door was there, but they had so many new innovations. We, for the first time, according to documented archaeology, we find the folding wooden door, and the sliding door that is in Roman remains. Also in Roman time, we have the windows, and also they used a lot of organic materials, like we mentioned before, like parchment, antlers, bladders, etc. But also they used wood. So wood was used for shutters. We can see, for example, the mold on the picture on the right. So this is a mold found in Pompeii of a wooden shutter. We can also see on the bottom picture drawing in a painting where we see the wooden shutters. So that is in the Roman period. But what happened is that in 100 BC, there was a discovery of glass. And so we can see in the pictures in the middle that we have remains of Roman glass pieces. And these pieces, as you see, they are a little bit opaque. They're not very transparent. They're greenish in color. And we have that evidence from archaeological remains, but also from mosaics, which are illustrated in many Roman houses, Roman temples, etc. You can see the picture to the left, the green-blue color that defines the glass in the opening. However, it's very important to note that the discovery of glass by itself dates back to much earlier than the Roman times. There is an ancient Roman historian, who's Pliny, you know it probably, noted that the Phoenician merchants discovered glass on the Syrian shores. And although there is also evidence that suggests that the first man-made glass was produced in Mesopotamia and Egypt, but this is a big thing because when we say the Syrian shores, we also say Lebanon. It includes the whole area. So also the blowpipe process dates to much earlier times, which is the 1st century BC, and this was done by Syrian craftsmen who invented this technique, and it was a revolutionary discovery because it made glass production easier, faster, and cheaper. So in early Christian and Byzantine churches, windows became more numerous and were often glazed. They were filled, for example, in this example, which is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul, by glass inside of a marble square pieces, and they were connected to each other with these marble square pieces. And so this is one of the examples where the use of glass became more prominent, especially in religious buildings. This continued throughout religion to be, to be like an artistic influence, always to have more and more beautiful presentations on doors, on glasses, etc. We can see it from Europe to even China and the whole Asian countries. Even later on, we had also doors that were covered with copper and its many alloys with a base of wood. And this was also used in many, many religious buildings. So as we move to the 1000 or until the 12th century, we have the Romanesque buildings with the Romanesque religious chapels and churches. And these also try to use more and more openings, more and more glass, but because of the architecture that was really heavy and thick, it was a little bit restrained up until the 12th century, where we have this Gothic invention of arches that are pointed and with a very easy way to open and to allow light to go in. Then it is then that the windows started to be more and more elaborate. We have a lot of colors, we have a lot of glazing that was attached by lead material, and we were using it more and more, but still this innovation was rare and expensive, and it was not for the common population. It was for really the high and public buildings. And then in the 17th century Europe, the Italian Renaissance came and the glass became customary for the ordinary home. And this is because of the invention of the cylinder process, as we see it here. The thickness of the glass in 1825 became to be uniform. And these are the first examples that we see of the use of glass in openings and windows that were uniform, up until the 19th century, when the plate glass technique was invented, and it was really clear glass that we have today. And this was done by the French. A lot of evolutions happened from the 19th century onwards. You already know that. There were also influences on doors, not just windows, and even the steel making technique and manufacture was becoming very popular and very used. This brings us back to the shores of Beirut. And if we want to think about the whole process that happened to these openings in order for them to come to Beirut, and when you look at Beirut, you see that really it was influenced by these many West and East developments and technologies and progress and openings. And they took a lot from these elements and embedded them in the architecture. And if we want to start to dissect, this is where we can say that, okay, now we understand really doors, the importance of doors, where they came from and how they're made of, the evolution that happened in order to come here. The same goes for windows and the triple arches as well. So let's start with the doors themselves and take a look at, first of all, the idea of a door, which is a very essential part of a building. It defines the accessibility, the functionality, the interior spaces, everything. And one of the most important parts, and even before that, is that we have doors still remaining in Beirut and in Lebanon, which date from prior to the 1860s. And these, we call them the Oriental type doors. So these are perfectly integrated doors. They're made of wood. They can have a stone lintel on top, or they can have an arch that covers them. They are made of panels. They can be decorated or even filled with iron nail pieces. And what is remarkable about these doors is that they don't have a wooden frame like you see them today. And we can still find some in Beirut, even though it's very rare, but it's possible. And this helps a little bit in the dating of the construction. We can look and say, okay, this was built really earlier than the 1960s, and we still have remains of it today. Also, these doors, their way of pivoting is on pivot hinges. We can see them in the pictures on the right, top and bottom. We can also see the wood partitioning that these doors are made of, which we call the boards and batten technique. And we can see as well the wooden lintel on top, which holds actually the structure of the door and make it pivot from the up and down. After the 1860s, we have what we call the Western type doors, which were more like in standardization and mass production. We will start, for example, with the entrance doors, which are remarkable entrances. We can see them. They are distinguished by their framing. They have two pilasters and a lintel, usually, and in the older type in ochre Mansouriya limestone, but sometimes we can find it in sandstone, ramle, marley, or even Carrara marble. And this ornamentation varies according to the design intended and to the status of the owner. These are two, or even there are so many, but these are two examples where we can see, for example, here that we have a Carrara marble entrance door, and then here, for example, we can see the pediment that ornaments its top. So this is a tympanum that is a carved pediment. Sometimes we can have just an empty top, or even we can have an arch that we call almarie, and sometimes ornamented with wrought iron railing. So it can be either blind or we have an open work. As for the hinge system, it is also a pivot hinge. We can see it in many doors, in many entrances, and the accessories of these doors vary according to their location, the style of the owner, and many other factors. The storefronts, these are the doors located at the ground level of the street, and they're generally enclosed by 2, 3, or 4 parts, and they open outwards on usually steel strap hinges. So we can see them as well in many ground floors in Beirut. Nowadays, they've been widely replaced with rolling shutters, but still you can find many. We can see, for example, in the upper picture that there is a relieving arch on top of it, but this one is blind. So this is to distribute the loads and guide them towards the sides of the wall. On the top part, it is not blind, it is open, and we have this ironwork grid that is placed there. Also, sometimes we have openings on top of it. Sometimes there are attics inside, and so this is why they need extra lighting. Here we can see a zoom in at the details, at the hinges, at even the divisions of wood that can vary from one door to another. Some are straight, while others are more flat, more paneled, Now, if we look at most of the houses in Beirut, we have the simple rectangular double leaf door that we can find almost anywhere, especially in the interiors of houses. Usually on top of it, there is a three-piece masonry lintel that has a central key. And it has almost a similar typology to the main entrance door, but this one mostly opens on steel strap hinges or, for example, barrel hinges. And we can see some examples in the houses, inside the houses of Beirut. Sometimes we can also see that there are decorated on top with moldings, with nice cornice-shaped tops. And then this also depends on the desire of the owners, the desire, like the aesthetic, need and aspirations. We can also sometimes see that these doors are painted in different colors to match the rooms, and in other times that they are painted in a way that, for example, shows that this is a wooden door, so you have the lines of the wood painted on top of it, so that you not really see the wood itself, but see their replica of the wood in the way they want it to be, like a noble looking wood. So to explain this door a little bit, and before going into the details, it is made of the fixed frame or casing and an upper lintel and post assembled. Everything is assembled without nail through what we call a mortise and tenon technique. We will see it later on. The periphery is surrounded by what we call the architrave. It can be very simple, or it can be a little more ornamented. So it's made of 2 wooden leaves, composed of 2 stiles and 4 to 5 rails from top to bottom. And here we can see that a part of the door, the left part, usually is fixed to the ground and to the lintel, as we can see in the middle picture as well. And it has a lock in the middle, mostly with a porcelain handle. And here in this picture, we can see also the ornamentation, the molding on the door, and the steel strap hinges on the left. We also have what we call the single leaf door. It's rather rare, so you don't always find it, but you can. And these are similar to the double leaf doors, but instead it's just single leaf. They're usually a little bit shorter, and they serve mostly in secondary spaces, in interiors, in vestibules. And to end the doors chapter, we're going to end it with the glazed doors. So these wooden doors combine the aspect and transparency of a window with the functionality of a door. So they were generally used as access door to balconies, terraces, or gardens, and they are composed of wooden leaves holding transparent or colored glazing. We can see also many examples of these doors in Beirut. Mostly, so we said mostly they are found on the outside, but sometimes we can find them in the interior of the houses. So dividing one room from the other, not in a connection with a balcony or garden. And we can see different examples showing different architectural or different stylistic techniques. So we have, for example, in the lower picture on the left, really divided glass frames, while in the middle they are divided into 3 squares. Here in the other picture in Ain al-Mraisi, we have even colored glazing on top, and sometimes the whole pane of the door, in this example on the right, is one flat pane without division. So these are also to understand a little bit the details and the typology. When we talk about glazing that is colored, it's mostly done by adhesive paper. Also, when we look at the hinges, they're usually barrel hinges. We have many different types of locks, and we also have many different accessories that shape these glazed windows, and, for example, the handle and even the steel lock on the sides. So now we are talking about windows, and also windows come in many shapes, many sizes, and many architectural styles. And it gives a lot of clues to the building's history. So if we start with the SASH window, it's considered one of the older window types that we have. It's usually made of wood and glass, and it is composed of two parts. So the upper part is fixed, and it has sides, side rails, where the lower part can go up and down according to these rails. And we can see it in older examples outside of Beirut still. And we can see, for example, sometimes it is divided into two parts with a horizontal division, or it can be divided into four parts with a cross one. One of also the older types is the window with a wooden protection grid. So these windows also are rather rare in Beirut, but we can still find few by exception. And these are made of interlocking and ornamented wooden elements. So also their shapes and sizes vary a lot according to the date and the location and the architectural typology. But mostly when you look at them, you see this ornamented wood in which every hole was made and which was overlapping one over the other. Now the rectangular window is a very common window, but here, before we talk about the modern rectangular window that we find in Beirut a lot, there are also windows that are found with an arched top, and this deserved a slide on its own because even the shutters were different. They had this arch that was placed on them, this arch that was cut, and then also we have different designs for this. They can be considered as an earlier typology preceding the modern rectangular window in a lot of cases, but also they were used in the same period in many other cases in Beirut. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they were done before. And we can see in the many examples how many typologies we can have with louvered shutter or plain shutters, with a division on top that separates the arch from the shutters that are rectangular, or with an arched shutter like in the first two cases. Now, the modern rectangular window is the most widespread. It dates from the late 19th century to the early 20th century. And it's composed of mainly three layers, if that's what we can call them. We have the exterior shutter, and then the interior casement, glazed casement, and then in the middle, we have the protection grid or the guardrail. And so these are also different. They can vary in design, their system can vary as well, and we will see the different aspects of these windows. So in order to really look at as much aspects as we can, let's start with the outer frame and cornice. So upon looking at these windows from the outside, before looking at shutters, before looking at anything else, let's look at the frame, let's look at what tops these windows. We have examples of stone cornices as well as wooden cornices that are mostly topped by zinc sheets to protect it from the rain, etc. And these stone cornices or wood cornices can also vary in level of decoration, of molding, and and they can also be, thicker, smaller, etc., and even be painted with lime afterwards. We also have decorated pediments, which are reserved for higher class buildings, if we want to call them that way, with higher status, and they can be really magnificently decorated with floral moldings and whatnot. We also have frames that surrounds these buildings. Sometimes they are even painted, and these frames can have, geometrical shapes or even floral and architectural shapes. The second element that we can look at is the louver and the shutters. So we have many types of shutters, even though you would think, oh yeah, what is there to talk about shutters? There are so many typologies, and they are in Beirut as well. We can find them, and they really define the different, tastes and even needs of the residents in the building. To the right, we have, for example, the louvered shutter, and it's very typical to find it. So it's made of these wooden panes, the stiles, and the rails, and in between we have these louvers. Sometimes they are fixed, like in this picture, but also we can have other examples where the louvers are movable. In another slide, I will show you a picture of one. So you can actually manipulate it to go up and down according to the sun and according to what you need in the house. Another example is a board and batten shutter, which we can find also in many houses. And as the name suggests, it's made of the boards of wood, and overlapping that is the battens that hold them together. And they are attached with steel strap hinges to the frame of the window. Another type, for example, is the paneled shutter, like we see in this example. And one of also the most interesting types is the sliding shutter, which is also rarely seen, but as the name suggests, it slides upwards like the sash window from down to up, and therefore lightens the room. The third element is the inner casement. So this is the glazed part of the interior of the window. And also in this case, we have many typologies. And these pictures do not resume everything because there are so many, and sometimes we even discover new typologies that we didn't know existed before. So we have, for example, the most common one is the one on the left with a fixed upper part and an operable bottom. And this is usually divided into 3 pieces, square pieces, and it opens and closes in the central axis. Sometimes the upper part, which is fixed, can be opened and it rotates. And this is through the use of, or through the release of, a small rotating accessory on top. And when we release that, the door can, the small part of the window, I'm sorry, can open up a little bit and let in air to the inside. Another example is the window, the casement that is divided into 2, so up and bottom, and both open to the 2 sides. So it's nothing is fixed there, everything can move, everything can open, and they even have special hinges with, sometimes they are decorated on the sides. One also other example is a fixed top and bottom, and the middle is opening to the inside. And sometimes these are really like a result of the function that is inside. For example, this specific window was found in an Ottoman school, and so it explains a little bit why we need to make the bottom fixed so that not easily, students or youngsters can climb and just go out the window and jump. So this is really partially for security reasons and also for functionality. The last, for example, in this slide is a window that is composed of operable accordion leaves. Also, it's kind of rare, but it's possible to find examples like these with many, many divisions and much smaller panes. So if we want to go deeper a little bit into understanding the typology and the details of these, we find, for example, this is in the middle, it's what I talked about before, the louver that is operable. This is the stick, the wooden stick that really moves up and down and can manipulate these shutters. This, for example, is the accessory that on which the strap hinges hold. As well, here we can see the strap hinges and the nails that go inside. This is the shutter dog or stop that holds the shutter to the outside. And this is also an example of an espagnolette that we find in many houses in Beirut. It's usually ornamented in very similar designs. Also, we will see that these designs were borrowed or were brought from the outside as really elaborate manual, as we say, to picking designs from wooden openings and from steel accessories. On the left, we see some details how these windows are constructed, what are the elements that define them, the strap hinges, the wooden boards. Also in the middle, we have this protective steel bar, and on the inside we have the glass panels, which are usually secured by the glazing putty that is placed between the wood and the glass. And this glazing putty also is very important to for securing this, and as well for, you know, the adoption of, I'm sorry. So the glazing putty is also very important to note that, you know, it can be damaged with time, and it's very important to pay attention towards always fixing it and not letting it, you know, fall partially from the window. We also have the iron hinges, the thick casing, and the wooden frame that shapes the entire window. Also in this detail, we can see the empty part between the frame and the wall, or the casing and the stone wall itself. And this is usually left empty, but sometimes we can see small, you know, stone rubble placed there, and sometimes we can also see wooden, you know, wooden pieces placed in the middle between the two to fix the frame to the stone itself and fix them together. So also in the details and typologies, we can see the mechanisms and handles that are really elaborate and various. And we can also see in the drawings the espagnolette, and how really a lot of windows in Beirut and outside of Beirut adopted the same designs and the same technique of opening and closing. So as we move on to the fourth element, which is the protection grille and the guardrails, these were usually used in the houses when they are on the lower floor. The protection grille is always, you know, on the whole area of the window. It goes from top to bottom, and it is made in a grid way with vertical and transversal steel elements. But when they are on the second floor, mostly these rails become guardrails, and so they become lower, and this is because they don't need this extra protection from robbery or other elements, and so they just need to have the safety element and be able to look out of the window. It can be really ornamented, or it can be very simple. It depends on the architectural style of the building. But what is important here is to mention that these steel elements, these iron guardrails, these iron elements were not welded together. They were always riveted, and they were always made through an interlocking system. So one part goes into the other, like we see, for example, in this picture here, to the right top. So we have the vertical elements that really penetrates the horizontal element, and you do not need to weld it together. Here in this example, we see the steel grids, the steel grills, and we can see how they are fixed. So sometimes they are fixed directly on the stone frame. And in this case, they need to be, like lead needs to be inserted in that so that we can avoid cracking and dilatation problems. But in many other times, they are fixed in the wooden frames. And when we do that, they have specific accessory and designs of fixation for that on the corner parts or even the bottom parts. There are many also additional elements that can be added to these grills. For example, we see that element on the right here. It's a spherical accessory. We can also, in the picture before, we can see this arrowhead here as well. So here we have an arrowhead, here we have this spherical element. So we can see this ornamentation, rather simple ornamentation on these steel grids. Also, to take a look at the construction technique of these windows, if we zoom in a little bit between the frame of the window and this is the guardrail on the left, and this is the stone wall. In the middle, this is what we talked about. It's this rather empty space in between which was intentionally left empty. And sometimes there are these wedges of wood that are connecting these two parts together. Here we can see also wedges inserted inside the walls. So every few meters, a few centimeters, 50 centimeters or so, we have these wedges inserted to ensure this stability. And if we look here, this is the top of the window. This is the lintel, the stone lintel, and the keystone, and under which we have this wooden lintel that holds the stone on top and connects it to the frame below. Another type of window that we see in Beirut and outside of Beirut is the coupled window, and this is a really old typology. It was not just created in the 19th century, but before, and we can see it in many palaces from the 17th century onwards. But the style that we have in Beirut is special to Beirut, and it's very close to the ornamentation of the triple arches in many cases. And when we say coupled window, we say that we are talking about twin arched openings with this intermediate column in between that can be made of marble, or it can also be made of sandstone or other. It's generally used to decorate, for example, stairwells in the buildings and sometimes specific rooms. The bottom of it is mostly operable. We can, open one of the windows or two of the windows, and the top is mostly fixed with specific ornamentation depending on the style of the building. We have also what we call the arch-shaped bay, which is, as its name suggests, an arch that is used mostly in stairwells and corridors. So it has a lower rectangular part with a pointed or semicircular upper part. So these windows types were used, and the conception of these windows were actually made to let in as much light as possible. But this desire to have larger openings meant also that we need increasing weights, that there are increasing weights, and therefore we had to use arches to eliminate these tensile stresses and provide the structural stability. And this is how we open large openings, but with large arches as well. And as is the case in the coupled windows, also these windows can be operable with a bottom part that can be opened and closed, and an upper part that is ornamented and fixed. Another example of windows is the oculus or rosette that we can also find in many Beiruti houses. They can be circular or oval shaped. Usually the oval shape is found in Liwan rooms, which are the middle extruding rooms in the houses. But we can also find them in other rooms as well, but this is typical in Liwan rooms. The oculus was used for ventilation, for light, as well as for aesthetic reasons. This is why we find so many geometric and floral patterns, and even the way it operates is dependent on the desire and the style. So here we can see many oculus, for example, that are fixed in the top part, in the top pictures. And we can see in the bottom picture on the left an oculus that is operable in the middle, so it is rotating on a middle hinge. We have also examples of oculus with a colored glazing. We have also this example of an oculus with this little middle circle that opens alone. So you have so many designs that you could encounter, and each of them is really unique in their own way. We even have what we call the rectangular or the pointed arch window. And these windows are, of course, high. So they are higher than the level of the people or the regular floor level. They are used mostly in attics, for example, in kitchens, on the top of like the higher part of the wall of the shop vault. And so it gives light and air to the inside. It illuminates specific parts that were not illuminated, especially in big spaces. And these can be found also in different shapes and sizes. We can have glass panels that operate. We can have just still openings that without any operating mechanisms. We can have even shutters on the outside that close and open. And of course, there are the steel protection grills that really protect it from any theft or anything else. To end the chapter of windows, we also have to emphasize that there are special shaped windows that we can find in many cases. They're not the norm, but we can find them in Beirut, such as semicircular, segmental, pointed arch, trefoil, or horseshoe arches. And these also were used as, you know, regular windows. So like we see the arched window, the system is still more or less the same with a fixed upper part and an operating lower part. But also they can be fixed panes, for example, with colored glazing, or even we can find entirely open geometric compositions that are just placed in specific walls or stairwells to give light and you know, a nice aesthetic addition. And now we move to the triple arches. So, of course, very well known, the triple arches are a major symbol of Beiruti houses. But what are the triple arches made of? What are the details that define it? And how to understand these arches. So we have a lot of examples of triple arches that are found in Beirut and outside Beirut with so many ornamented motifs of so many different styles. And there are inspirations from Gothic style, from floral motifs, from even geometric forms. And these are like the elements that define the style of the whole facade, because it gives this extra aesthetic language that the building wants to give. And so we can divide these triple arches into main, let's say, functionality purposes. So we have the triple arches that serve as an entrance bay. So when we go into the house and we want to enter the house, this is our entrance. We have a main door topped by an arch and two side openings, windows that are topped by arches. And this is the way to go in. Usually we have also a stair in front of it, or a veranda, or a gallery to lead to it. We also have what we call the window bay, which are also triple arches but without doors. So they just serve as a connection, a visual connection between the inside and the outside, and as windows which are topped by arches. They can view the street. Sometimes they are on the ground floor and they just overlook the streets, and sometimes they are higher and they overlook a view or the sea, etc. The most common is the balcony bay, with the triple arches leading to a balcony, the balcony of the house. It can have, for example, a middle door and two side windows, or sometimes it can have three main doors that go to the outside. And these arches can have so many varying shapes, forms, and designs. We can, first of all, if we look just at the masonry, we can see that we have so many forms that the arches can take. For example, here we have the horseshoe on the right, and the one next to it, we also have an ornamented masonry design on top. And we also have simple forms. Sometimes even we have a discharging arch on top of these arches, just to distribute the weights, and so the weight doesn't go directly to the opening and cause any problems. We have many examples and many typologies of arches in Beirut, and we can see, for example, we have, for example, glazed colored openings. We have some people who like to add a little twist in this picture on the bottom and make very ornamented doors and windows on the side. We have also additions such as panels in front of the arches with ornamented wood or ornamented stone. So this is just one of the many possibilities that we can find in triple arches in Beirut. So if we want to go a little bit deeper in the details and the typologies of these, and if we look at these arches from a closer point of view, a closer perspective, we can see that in many cases, these arches are not just one drawing on a 2D shaped panel. they are actually 3D drawing, if you want to call it in that way. They are composed of a frontal design and then a back design on the inside. And when you look at the picture in the bottom left, you see this, you see that there is a drawing on the outside, and then there's the glass, and then on the inside there's a different drawing. And this gives this contrast and this perspective and this depth to the triple arch, and it doesn't just make it as a plain, you know, facade, plain wall, plain glass. And when we look at the detail of one of the elements in the middle picture, for example, we can see this double design, one from the inside, one from the outside, and between which the glazing is placed. On the picture on the right, this is also a topic that we will mention later on. It's the way that these wooden elements are built, are placed together, and this is also by a system of interlocking wooden elements. They were not nailed together or, you know, with extra additional steel straps or materials. They were just, you know, perfectly fitting one over the other, overlapping together and forming this shape. Since we are talking about these arches and about this contrast between inside and outside, it's important to note that also the glass is not a one-panel glass that was just placed between the two. It's actually small pieces of glass that are cut exactly in the shape of the design or of the motif and are placed in between the two parements. And so this is just one way of saying what we talked about before, about the evolution of glass, about the way that it moved from something that was done in small panes into something that was done in bigger panes. It moved from something that was really with a little defects to something that was perfectly transparent. And we see that evolution here, and we see the outcome of this evolution. One example on the right, this is just to mention it. It's not a norm, we cannot find it a lot. But this is to say, when you look at this picture, it's not the bottom of bottles or anything. This is actually a technique that is also very old and very traditional. We did not mention it in the history, so that we're not going to make it long, but this is the crown glass technique. And in order to assemble these, you know, circular elements, they were assembled with lead to one another. And this also is one of the many aspects that we can find in triple arches of Beirut and encounter on the way. So now we move on to a little bit of, you know, zoom in detail, close-ups on stuff. We see how, for example, the wood in the left picture is cut to exactly fit the shape of the marble column and its base. We see also how the marble column is made in a way that it looks like it's half inserted in the wall, the stone wall, and the other half is protruding to the outside. Sometimes even they paint it with lime plaster or lime wash as well. We can see here in the middle picture the capital that can be very well ornamented, and we can also see elements of iron that connect the arches to the walls on the outside. And we can also have a lot of exceptions to the norm, which says, for example, that yes, the 3 parts of the bottom triple arch are made of pivoting doors. Sometimes we can have a cut door directly in the middle with a fixed upper part. So there is no norm. There are always people who really played with the architecture, played with the way they wanted it to look and to feel and to experience. So this is the part I was telling you about, which is how the wood was joined. And we have many types of joinery. This is just a sample of the most common we can find in Beirut. So we have what we call the mortise and tenon, which is the most famous, and it's when we insert one wood joint to the other in a specifically cut area that directly goes on the inside without needing to use extra accessories or glue or anything. This is used in so many of the openings, doors, even arches, as we showed before. We have the mitred half-lap joint, which is mostly seen, for example, in the frames of the windows. Sometimes they use this technique and it's a little bit older, and sometimes they use this butt joint technique, so it's just overlapping in the corner of the wood. We also have half-lap joints when we want to crisscross wooden elements, or dado joints. So there are so many techniques. Of course, the carpenter can look in more details to how every window, every door is made, and then accordingly they can readjust and restore. Also, for example, this is just a sneak peek at this French catalog that shows the ironmongery that was used and that became widely spread. That is Maison Garnier, for example, and we can see that these same spirits, same designs were also adapted in Beiruti houses. Let's talk a little bit now, after all this, about the pathological problems that we encounter and the damages that were caused throughout the years. So one of the most recent damages and the most emblematic and seen as a structural damage were the damages to the lintels and to the keystones of the openings. So we have, for example, damages and cracks that go along the joints of the stone, but we also have cracks that really fracture the stone itself, and this is when it becomes much more serious. We also have complete loss of keystones in the middle. We have loosening of these stones and bigger cracks as well that would require major structural work, or even demounting and dismantling and reconstruction. We also have cracks on top of arches and lintels. So these are just examples of how much the damages affected the openings, especially that they are the weakest part of the structure. We also have damages specific to the triple arches because they were more than the openings themselves. They were also part of the weakest element in the house. It was perfectly open, perfectly facing the blast as well. We have broken marble capitals. We have also cracks above arches, and we have complete out of plumb structures and major structural problems. As for the openings themselves, the carpentry itself, we have a loss of these components as well. So the loss of wood, the loss of glass, the loss of the elements that shape these openings, and the loss of shutter as well. So these are many of the problems we can encounter, or we have encountered already. Now, wood damage and deterioration, so part of it can be traced back to the blast, but there's also a big part that is caused by, time passing, by many factors that contributed to the deterioration, the humidity, the rain, the insect infestation. So we can see, for example, in the picture on the left, also this is a rotten wooden piece. This is in the middle, a lintel piece that was found under a stone lintel. Here we can see a part of a frame, and we can see also the nail. First of all, notice how large and how big is the nail. So this is just as a side note to say that really this empty space in between, and then there's this whole part that goes in the stone structure. So this is just as a side note. But we can also see the wood, how affected it is. The paint and the degradation of paint in the right pictures can also lead to a lot of wood damage. And this is why it's important to keep maintaining this paint on a regular basis. Also, steel and steel rust can cause a lot of problems, whether it's when it's inserted in the stone and it causes cracks and fractures, or when it's, for example, next to the wooden frames or used as an opening mechanism. Sometimes the rust can cause this functioning system not to function anymore. And so rust is also a problem and should be treated. We will see how later on. But for now, we will move to the last and most widespread pathological problem, it's human-made problems. And that's the incoherent additions that we ourselves do to the buildings, especially now after the blast, is the replacement of these beautiful windows and elements with aluminum windows, just for practicality reasons. So this is to sum up every problem that happened, or in general, everything that happened. There are also, of course, many small problems, but these are, these can be taken step by step. For the methods of restoration and conservation, we are going to talk about the different aspects of these problems, what these problems are, and what, in fact, the method of restoration is to that. So for the interventions targeting everything that we call in the structure of the opening or in the hosting wall. So when we say, yes, we lost a keystone, yes, we have cracks in lintels, etc. This is when we want to do the first and primary, most important intervention, which is to consolidate these openings. The openings are always the weakest part of the building. And before doing anything else, they should be consolidated so that the efforts, the weight of the upper part do not make it even harder, do not break the openings more and more, so that it becomes a whole, like a whole wall. And this is also good to gaining time and to arriving to the actual restoration of these openings. So another part is, now, after we consolidate, let's say we want to start restoring these opening, and we are still talking about the hosting wall, not the opening itself. Of course, we said there are lost lintels, there are lost structures. Sometimes we can find these lintels, or there's just cracks around them, and what we can do is relocate them and reconsolidate them. Sometimes the lintel or the keystone is completely gone, and maybe also fallen, cracked into pieces. And this is where we would need to place a new keystone or a new lintel that is designed in the same way that it was before. And it uses the same material as the structure of the wall. And as well, it should be bonded with lime mortar as it was. This technique goes as well to lost walls on triple arches, etc. So it's not just lintels. The arches that were lost follow the same concept, but in many cases, for example, we can find fallen arch stones around the site next to the opening itself. So it's very important to put numbering over them, to lay them down in front of us, to see the shape, how it's looking in order to reconstruct this. And of course, to number everything and reconstruct using lime mortar as well. The marble of these triple arches, for example, can also be found. You can have a little bit of fun doing puzzling and reuniting the marble pieces together. And sometimes you can be surprised to find that you will almost have a complete column still in place, which can be restored, and it can be put back in place through structural integration. In other cases, when you don't find marble pieces, or when the pieces are really, really small, you can get a new Carrara marble or a new similar marble column and also place it in its original location. So for the intervention targeting the actual carpentry, so the wooden and glazed windows and doors, we're going to divide it into two main parts. So if the opening element is really very damaged, it's irrecoverable or completely lost. So this is when we say, okay, so probably we will need a new opening. And when we want to make a new opening, we will have to make it similar to the older one. And that is not just similar from looking from afar. It's similar. No, it's similar with all the interlocking wooden element technique, with all the details of these openings and the glazing and the divisions. And in these cases, it might surprise you. Let's say, oh yeah, we're making a new opening, but you can reuse so many things in so many ways. For example, the ironmongery that was used in the older openings, even though the openings are broken or lost or collapsed or whatever, there are still their accessories that could be in good shape and can be reused. And nowadays it's really hard to get the same designs as before. Also, for example, if you need to stitch specific parts or to fill the gap between frame and wall, there are these lost wooden pieces that you can actually recycle and reuse in making the new openings and new windows. You should be very careful as well to the choice of wood in these cases when making a new opening. First of all, sticking to the oldest or to the original material, which is the Kotrani wood, but that's not all, because even now in the market we have many problems with these woods because they're not properly dried and they're not properly treated. So this is a very important aspect. It's to be dried, to be treated, and also when you look at the wood before using it, make sure that the knots inside of it are not critical, are not in places where you don't want them to be, in the middle of a lintel or something. So these are mainly how we can completely restore new openings. Now, if the opening element also is very damaged in the triple arches, so we are talking about something different than the windows or the doors. The triple arches have really special designs, special pieces that frame everything and make everything. So if we cannot reuse these pieces anymore, although in some cases it is possible to do so, and it actually gives a little bit of history to the restoration that we are making, we can also imitate these ornamented panes with a similar material, with a similar design, with similar dimensions. And it's very important to emphasize on this part, because we have to accurately reproduce these motifs, because the way the angles of the wood are made and the way that the interior overlaps with the exterior are very important to the visual aspect of these openings. They're not just us saying that, yeah, you should do exactly the same. They are actually very important visual aspects and language and authenticity. This is the respect of the authenticity and of the language of these openings. Now, when the opening damages ranges from light to medium, so the openings are not completely lost. Maybe parts of them are lost. Maybe there are few defects in them. This is, first of all, it's very important to not judge a wooden piece or any opening element without carefully looking and without cleaning very well before deciding what to do. Because sometimes it looks like it's completely rotten, it's a lost cause, but when it's properly cleaned and the wood is properly seen, you can notice that, for example, the opening can be restored, and an appropriate treatment can be made to restore these pieces. If we have parts of an opening that are very damaged, and this is the beauty of our Beiruti houses openings, it's that they are interlocking, as we said before, so it's very easy to manipulate these parts. And we can say, for example, okay, so this piece of wood is really damaged, let's replace it, and that you can do very easily. You can remove it and replace it. And sometimes you don't have to remove the whole piece. Sometimes it's just a little part of the piece. And in that case, you can just remove a part of it that is damaged and replace it with, for example, another piece of wood if it's big, or even with PVA, glue, majoun, that's what we call it also in Arabic, and repaint on top of it. So also, after we do that, we have to reapply a system of coating and paint. And of course, infected wood and damaged ironmongery can be repaired by this, what we talked, replacing, patching, splicing, consolidating. And, a curative treatment for this is necessary in some cases, but also a preventive treatment against fungicide, insecticide, and later on the waterproofing, especially for the shutters on the outside. And also in this case, we can recycle wood. So when we have pieces that are missing, we can use old wood from openings that we are not going to use anymore and put them instead. So also here we can see pictures of treatment of openings, the cleaning, the top cleaning, the removal of damaged layers, and the repainting of the wood. And also the reproduction, for example, when needed, of specific pieces as they are. We can also note that when we have rust, especially in protective steel grids, iron grids, this is where we need to treat this rust and to place a layer of protection over it, especially that it's going to be inserted back into the wood that we are going to put back in the opening. So also, if necessary, and there is a need to remove and store wooden elements, so if such actions are required for a reason or another, we can remove specific pieces. So usually we keep the frame of the opening in place and we restore it as it is, but there are some cases where we would need to remove a frame if there are major damages, there is humidity, there is a lot of rotting in the wood, we can remove those frames. And if we need to reuse parts of that, we can store them, but we have to be sure that they would be carefully stored at the right temperature and away from humidity for a later reuse. And finally, regarding windows and exterior doors, so we can improve, especially in terms of thermal insulation, these openings. And since we talked about this empty space between the frame and the stone, we can actually use it to our advantage and use a gasket to properly seal in between this empty space and eventually apply a sealant on top. Then the sealant will be covered by this architrave that goes through the opening itself and covers everything. And this is how we can ensure this comfort, this thermal comfort, especially if the house will be inhabited again. The people need this comfort, will need to be relaxed in the house, etc. And this is how we end. Thank you very much. I hope I can answer everything if there are questions.
Thank you, Paula. It was very interesting. We actually do have a few questions. So the first one, we learned 2 weeks ago during the first presentation, Introduction to the Beiruti Houses, that most of those homes have similar proportions. Does it apply as well to carpentry works?
I'm sorry, have similar proportions?
Yes, in size. So for example, the central halls usually, it's not the same size, but the tiling was cut the same. So they used to add, let's say, one more tile to make it bigger. So the question is, the carpentry works, the windows, the arches, does it have a similar proportions in most of those houses?
There is this very very common way of, or very typical proportion shape for openings, especially when we're talking about windows, when we're talking about triple arches. But there isn't like one proportion that defines everything. We can have exceptions, so I wouldn't say that they are the same, but rectangular windows usually are, not very wide, rather high. So yes, it is that same proportion. Triple arches more or less vary according to the house itself, to the height of the floor and to the width of the room. So these proportions would differ a little bit, but with doors and windows, it's more common to have a very close proportion, yes.
Thank you. How are these windows and doors adapted to fit the culture and needs of Lebanese people?
Yeah. So first of all, we said that a lot of opening elements were adopted and were brought from the outside. Of course, there are so many aspects of openings that are really essential for human living, and this is how people need to interact, need to behave. And doors, for example, since the dawn of time, evolved in the same concept and in the same shape and reached to where it is today. But the technique, in fact, was brought from the outside, from the Western civilizations and etc. And so how it's adapted to our needs is actually a question of how we live in those houses. So we need those doors placed in specific ways. We need those balconies. For example, we need those windows. And then the technique was brought from the outside and was adapted to the Lebanese needs, not because we want it that way specifically, but because that is how the technology and evolution brought us to. As for the triple arches, the need, in fact, was to look at the outside, to actually open up, to let in as much light as possible, but as well to show off, to say that we are here, that this is what our evolution brought us to, and this is our architectural and aesthetic point of view and addition. And this is kind of adapted to the need of these people that made those houses and lived in those houses, and brought these ideas from Western civilizations and made it possible in Lebanon because it fit this this ambience and this architecture.
Thank you. Regarding colored glass, are the houses with colored glass usually considered more noble?
So it would be possible to find it more in noble houses, yes, than in modest houses. I would say most probably it is an addition that was made to show what you can do and to color more. I do not always presume that it is something 100% for every house, because that's not the way we can look at things, because you can always find exceptions. But usually, yes, it is mostly used in those houses.
Okay. Are there cases of interior shutters in those houses?
Are they cases of? I'm sorry.
Interior shutters.
Yes. Sometimes we do have interior shutters, but it's rare. It's more common to have them on the exterior, but yes, we do have interior shutters.
Is there a reason why those shutters would be put in the interiors?
Yes, usually I think it's an older technique to put shutters on the interior. That is before it was possible to use a lot of glass and to always open the house. And usually the shutters would be the way to close a window. So that is why in my opinion, it would be possible to have it there. But also these shutters are a symbol of the window. They are a symbol of usage, and they can be modified according to the needs of the people. So you can put them on the inside if you wish to do so, but it's more common to put it on the outside.
Okay. We have one more question. So following up on the point of doors and carpentry being brought from abroad, what sort of skill set is currently available in Lebanon when dealing with traditional windows and doors?
What sort of, I'm sorry?
Skill set.
Skill sets. In people, you mean, or in material?
So I think, oh yeah, people.
So there are many artisans, carpenters that we have in Lebanon that work in these openings and in these houses, and we can find many who actually can similarly reproduce these types of openings. So that is one thing, and we can as well have many elements found in reused markets to adapt to these openings and therefore to reuse them in the restoration. And so it's not something that is impossible to do. We do have the people for it, and we do have the material for it, and we can find it in the Lebanese market.
Okay. Can that carpentry be applied in a world dominated by aluminum frames and modern, cheaper alternatives?
This is a good question. And yes, mostly it's very easy to use aluminum instead. And we do know that people are always opting for this for comfort and for ease of use and etc. But this is not the reason we preserve, or this is not the reason we still live in our houses, and this is not the reason we look at areas and at streets and we say this is a beautiful place and this is a nice architectural intervention, when everything is the same and everything is typical. What characterizes these houses is actually this carpentry, this detail, this elaborate motifs, and this is what makes it unique, what makes Beirut special. So if we're going to apply a standardized concept on our whole city, then we are going the wrong way. We have to fight in order to apply a really historically related and aesthetically significant concept, and fight to have carpenters, which we do, but we can have more in Lebanon to do these windows and doors and to use them in the houses, because in fact if the question also is about the ease of living in a house with an aluminum frame or aluminum window, and saying that the carpentry is not easy to live with, then there are so many ways that we can adapt the carpentry to nowadays needs. And there are so many details that we can do so that it becomes easier to live in these houses and have these carpentries as windows and as doors.
Thank you, Paula. What's the size of those glazing usually? The thickness actually of the glazing.
So usually
the old carpentry.
Yeah, usually it's like 3 millimeters thick, and it's inserted in the thickness of the wood, which is almost 4 centimeters to 4.5 or 5 centimeters, depending on the wood. Sometimes, of course, the entrance doors are a little thicker, but yes, the glazing is usually 3 millimeters thick.
And is it still available right now during is it accessible to have 3 millimeters thick glazing?
Yeah, we can do that. The question is, we have actually not just one type of glazing, but we also have older glazing which are less transparent, and we're done in the original technique of glazing, the traditional one. So these are harder to do, harder to find, and harder to adapt. It would be nice to actually think of a project that would reanimate this in Lebanon, but I'm not saying it's so easy to do. But to bring those simple, clear 3 millimeter glasses, it's very possible to do, and we can as well adapt them to every sort of opening and triple arch as well.
Thank you very much, Paula. That's it for today, I guess. Our next presentation will be about the finishes, the tiling, the wall paints, and I hope you all will join us. Thank you so much.